language to
Ah.
describe to him who I was, what would be most aligned with my passions and the purpose that I thought I was here on the planet to achieve. And so there was no way I could articulate it, so he couldn't begin to, make the right choice for me or offer the right thing to me to get me to stay. And that's really what brought me to the work that I'm doing right now, that coming to that moment, that epiphany when you realize I'm successful at what I'm doing, I'm skilled at what I'm doing, but I'm not passionate about how I'm leading my life, and I don't feel this sense of connection between who I am and what I do.
Wow, that's amazing. That's an amazing story, Elena. I didn't know that part about your background about the research scientist, so that's fascinating, and now it makes sense to me because I think I met you through the lens of the work that you're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's wonderful to hear your story, your journey, the time that you took to consider this incredible offer, and then to make another choice and to go in the direction that you are obviously very deeply involved in now and very passionate about. So it's interesting that you didn't have the language, but you're somewhere in your heart, your soul, your being, you knew that this was not the right thing for you.
And that's exactly what it was. It was just this deep inner knowing that whatever I was there to accomplish, I had accomplished, or there to learn, I had learned, and that it was time for me to move on. I didn't know what the next chapter was going to look like, so in essence, Gloria, I left for hope. I left for hope that the next path would be revealed to me.
Yes. Well, speaking of next chapter, you've written several books, and I want to talk with you about the focus of your last book, which is called The Purpose-Linked Organization, How Passionate Leaders Inspire Winning Teams and Great Results. I love that title. First of all, before I ask you a more detailed question, could you define for us, Elena, how you define passion? And then let's kind of delve into the book and examine that, and then take a look at what you call the passion archetypes.
Oh, absolutely. I define passion as the outward manifestation of the deeper purpose that drives you. I believe passion and purpose are intimately entwined, almost like this dual strands of DNA. I'm sorry, but I'm a scientist. I always go back to something that's scientific as an analogy. But they're connected. So when we think of this notion of purpose, we all struggle with it. Like, how do I define my purpose? Do I need to do it in 25 words or less? And we struggle with that great big question, what is your purpose in life? But what I realized as I began to really examine this question for myself and think about the thousands of leaders that I had interfaced with and worked with throughout my career and others that I studied and interviewed as I was trying to unravel this subject called purpose and passion, it was clear to me that people could not always describe this thing called purpose, but we could observe them demonstrating passions externally in the way they behaved around particular activities or ideas that seemed to capture their spirit. So I realized then that there's a connection and that we are kind of misdefining this thing called passion. We think it's, I'm passionate about golf, or I really love cooking, or, I like going to visit the art galleries. And those are all activities that we enjoy, but that may not really represent the deeper passions that are part of our DNA, part of our soul. And so I think of them as being connected. Passion being the outward expression of the deeper purpose that drives us.
Thank you. Actually, when you said that, I thought of this. I've just come back from doing some work with Parker Palmer's work, Courage to Lead, and he talks about this Mobius strip idea, the inner life and the outer life, and you talk about it as that double-stranded DNA. So I really appreciate your metaphor for that. So tell us a little bit more about your book, The Purpose-Linked Organization. I know that in that book you examine how leveraging employee passions drives productivity in the workplace. And could you tell us a little bit about that and the work that you do in terms of how you weave this into your work with your clients?
Oh, absolutely. So what's really interesting when you extract yourself from an organization, you have these moments when you look back on what transpired during the time that you were with that organization and what you learned. And as an HR professional, I became incredibly intrigued with this notion of how to connect with the passions of the people that work for and with us. And I became intrigued by it because the big question I had for myself when I left corporate America was, oh boy, I wonder how this could have turned out differently. Like, how could the organization lose me? And how could I fall out of love with the organization? How could that be possible? And it occurred to me that there was something that as leaders and as HR professionals, we were fundamentally missing in the way we engaged with the people that we hired, the people that were part of our teams. We largely spent a good deal of time worrying about whether or not people had the skills that were necessary to do a job. And don't get me wrong, skills are always going to be important.
Yes.
Because trying to do a job without them is an exercise in frustration. So skills are important. And then we looked for this nebulous thing we called fit, whatever that was. Well,
yes.
This person fit with this culture. And we had a variety of probably fairly faulty ways of identifying whether or not they would. But in the way in which we asked people to work, we really did not understand who they were at their core. So it was sort of a situation where here's the job, these are the skills you need to do it, these are the expectations, go for it. And we held people to some set standard of what that job performance was supposed to look like. Most of the time, people deliver on it, but we really never engaged them beyond that. And because of my own experience, I began to realize we weren't engaging the whole person when we were bringing them into the organization. And if we could, we inherently understood that we would get a lot of discretionary effort. When someone's really excited about what they're doing, they're working and thinking about their work during the times that you're not paying them to do it. And, I realized that as I was beginning to, I conducted a study when I left my corporate role because I wanted to understand whether other people were out there like me or whether I was as crazy as people were accusing me of being. And during that study, I interviewed a ton of high potential people across 14 different industry segments, both domestic and international. And what I was finding over and over again is that the individuals who felt like they were in a job where their skills and their passions and their values all had a voice, those were the people for whom it would be very difficult for some other organization to recruit them away. They were also extremely productive in their roles and extremely fulfilled by them.
Mm-hmm.
And those folks told me that I might be able to make, $20,000, $30,000 more going to the organization across the street, the company across the street. And headhunters call me all the time trying to recruit me. But what they said was, I don't know if I can recreate this. And I'm going to ride this wave all the way to the beach because it just doesn't get any better than this.
Yes. So tell us more about the archetypes. And I know that you and a team of researchers have created an online tool that you call the Passion Profiler, which measures what you call the archetypes, the passion archetypes, Elena. Could you tell us about that tool? And again, tell us a little bit more about the archetypes as well. Absolutely.
Well, the tool, the Passion Profiler, was developed as a response to how do we actually measure passion. And a team of researchers from the University of Michigan worked with me to create this tool because as I was doing the the research that I described to you, where I was looking at the high potential of folks in the 14 industry segments, I began through that research to notice certain patterns of passion that seemed to be very identifiable, and they appeared over and over again. And as I examined those further, I realized I had been seeing these same patterns in the leaders that I had been working with when I was in a corporate job, but I didn't have a name for them. And what I essentially did, working with this team, was codify those particular behaviors into 10 distinct, what I called passion archetypes. And we describe those in the book. The 10 passion archetypes are things like creator and conceiver, discoverer and processor, teacher and connector, altruist and healer, transformer and builder. And we all have all 10 of those archetypes within us to greater or lesser degrees. They're part of our personality. The trick really is to understand what your top 3 archetypes are, what we call your passion archetype cluster. Because when you do, you have a much better sense of the strengths that you're likely to enjoy because of those passions. You have a better sense of the vulnerabilities that you'll be more subject to because you have those particular passions. And you'll also understand the environments and roles in which you're likely to thrive. So the book was really written to help leaders understand that on your team are people with all of these different passions. And how do you effectively lead and manage people who have passions that are perhaps different from your own? And how do you recognize the signs of these particular passions in the folks on your team so that you understand how to best leverage someone with those particular passions? And what happens when you've got a team that has gaps in the passion representation on the team? Because that, in fact, impacts the way the team solves problems, the way it looks at executing strategies, and it completely shifts the variety of lenses through which that team is able to look at your business. And so what we've essentially done with the Purpose-Linked organization is give leaders a sort of a primer on the passion archetypes, and also help them to understand the formula for really driving engagement in their organization. And that formula really is creating that space, that place where they are leveraging the passions of folks, but they're also providing them with an opportunity to utilize their skills in an environment that honors their values. Because without that, the rest of it doesn't work.
Yeah, I get it. Thank you. So I just want to say for our listeners, the word archetype is one of those words that some of us hear and we go, what? But you said a key word that connects the dots for me, Elena, and that is patterns. Mm-hmm. So the archetypes are like patterns that you see, that you saw in the workplace, that you obviously did research on. And archetype, the way that I think about that in my own work is it really is looking at a pattern that cuts across differences in terms of all kinds of differences, really, but it's kind of the underlying matrix, if you will, or deep pattern in terms of human behavior. Can you say more about that? Or
yeah, I think you've done an excellent job of explaining it. I like it to tell my clients that your archetypes are equivalent to a set of lenses that you have in your glasses through which you look at the world. And your lenses will have perspective and dimension and colors and an angle to them that someone with passions different from yours don't have. And when we put all of those together, all of those lenses together, we get a kaleidoscope of perspective that we otherwise wouldn't have. So,
thank you. I know you talked about some of this, but I'm going to ask you this question in case there's more to say about the value of knowing the archetypes, the passion archetypes. If I'm a leader in an organization, or if I'm a team leader, what are some of the things that I can leverage as a leader? You talked about strengths, you talked about looking at gaps, you talked about problem solving, you talked about this kaleidoscopic way of looking at things. Are there other places where I, as a leader, where I can say, oh, wow, this is really going to help me with my team, with my business,